Okay, this video is going to be talking about due process and procedural safeguards for parents and their involvement in like their child's education. So when talking about due process, it's basically like the legal term that students are entitled to have things checked by someone that's not just a school and directly involved. So there can be courts, there can be lawyers that have to approve what is happening. And within the due process thing, there is procedural safeguards, which is what I'm going to go into now. So it's known as parents' right, like colloquially, like to parents in the special education sphere, because it is the thing that makes sure parents are involved. So, like I said, it ensures due process. And when might due process be like necessary is a lot of times, like I said in another video, it can be necessary like if you don't think the evaluation the school did is correct, like you think your child has autism and they didn't get assessed as it, or vice versa. But it will also include things like if there is an accessibility for the student, if they're not receiving the services they need, or if the student is being expelled or suspended or getting detentions or disciplined in some way. The school cannot do that just because the student is disabled. If the student is nonverbal and they weren't like addressing a teacher, then they can't be punished for that. So making sure that there are like laws to protect students to make sure they're not being punished for something out of their control. So that's another something that you might want to use due process for. So within this procedural safeguards, there's like about like 5 or 6 things that are pretty big. So the first thing is, like I talked about, getting consent for giving consent for an evaluation of your child before they're being classified as having a disability. So the school cannot determine that your child is disabled without telling you, or like getting your input in on the process and getting consent. There also has to be, or parents have to receive consent or give consent to schools that their child will receive the accommodation specified in the IEP, and also for like their placement. So the school can't just be like, oh, I think the kid should spend more time in the special education classroom and then not get parent consent. Parents have to consent to anything like that. So that can happen at the IEP meeting or before or after. There has to be communication to parents where they will give consent. The next thing is the notification of providing services to a child for the first time. So whenever a student is receiving more services, like having an aide, having some form of therapy or something at the school, parents have to be notified of that. They have to know of any changes that the child is like having, like in their day. They also have to receive notification when their child is going to be aging out of public education. So students with disabilities can attend school longer than like a typical student, which would normally be around 18. Students with disabilities can graduate at 21. So parents have to be notified when their child is going to be reaching that point and they're going to be aging out of the system. The next thing is that there's confidentiality of records. So schools cannot share the child's like evaluation results. They can't share the child's like grades or things, what their IEP looks like with anyone except people that it would directly pertain to. So teachers of the student that need to know the accommodations will receive the IEP, but other teachers just in the building will not receive it. It's confidential, and that's another like parent right thing or procedural safeguard to make sure the student isn't being discriminated against. The next thing is that parents can appoint surrogate parents to be there for them if they're not able to make a meeting or something due to work. And they are also able to advocate for the child the same way that the child's parents would be able to. And the last thing is impartial hearings. So when there is a due process hearing for the student, if they're not having their rights met or they're being discriminated against in some way, the parents are able to have a lawyer, the school is able to have a lawyer, and they have to see like a non-biased third party that can be like a judge or something that is able to determine whether the student is being discriminated against or not. And they can't just take the school side because of the school or anything like that. The parents are entitled to having impartial hearings to make sure that their child is having all of their like rights and everything respected.